Once there was a poor little tailor. He was sewing up some final stitches on a jacket that he'd been working on. He sat at his kitchen table. There was the last piece of bread from his cupboard that he had planned to eat for breakfast before him. And off to his side came the morning sunlight through the window that looked down to the city streets below. And while he stitched away, he could hear someone walking up those streets, a peasant woman calling out, "Good jams for sale! Good jams for sale!" He thought, that would be very tasty on my bread. And so he opened up the window and he gazed down below, calling out, "Good woman, you can sell your jams up here! Good woman, you can sell your jams up here!" So the woman carried her heavy basket of jams up the 3 flights of stairs to his little workshop, and after she had been invited in and caught her breath, she asked him how much he would like. Said the little tailor. "Let's see here." He started pulling out each jar to inspect them. He sniffed each one, pulling every single jar from the basket, until finally he settled upon one and said, "This one here smells good. You can measure me out 4 ounces of this jar, even if it is a quarter pound." Well, the woman was infuriated. How dare he had the gall to have her come all the way up here and waste her time to sell a mere 4 ounces of jam. Well, she dished him up his 4 ounces, put all her jams back in the basket, and left in a storm, with steam coming out of her ears. The little tailor then took his 4 ounces of jam and he spread them on his bread. He thought, that tastes very good, but I should put a blessing on it and finish my stitches before I eat, as any proper citizen would. So he said, "Dear God, please bless this jam and bread, that it may nourish and strengthen my body." And then the tailor quickly got to work back on his project. Only this time he worked a bit faster and the stitches got a little bigger in anticipation for his little snack later. He wasn't the only one salivating at the mouth for this jam. There were a number of flies also in the room that was beginning to smell its sweet fragrance. They started to swarm around his bread, wanting to get their share of the treat. The little tailor said, "Well, who invited you?" And he tried to swish them away, but being that the flies couldn't understand words, they were certainly not deterred by his waving hands. They continued to grow in numbers around his bread. Well, the brave little tailor grew impatient and more irritated with these buzzing creatures. He took a scrap of material that he had next to him, waited until the flies settled down on the table, and then with one quick movement of his hand, he came down and swatted that cloth on the flies. He peeled it up to see what kind of damages he'd done, and when he did, he could see a number of flies. I wonder how many he thought he had killed. Well, he started counting them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 flies. 7 flies in one blow, said the little tailor. Well, he couldn't help to be a little impressed with his quick hand and his surge of courageousness inside of him flow through his veins. He thought, well, why the whole town should hear of this great heroic deed that I have done. He went to the closet and he pulled out the finest material he had, and he cut himself out a nice belt. And there on it he embroidered beautiful bold letters with the words 7 in 1 blow. And just admiring his work, he thought, no, not just the town should know about this great deed, but the whole world shall know about it. And he took that belt and he fastened it around his waist. And he was about to bound out the door when he thought, I maybe should bring some food with me along the way. Well, the bread had flies in it already, so he went to the cupboard, but the only thing there was a moldy ball of cheese. Well, that's better than nothing, he thought. Put it in his pocket, and he went out the door. He strutted around the town upright with his chin up, very proudly displaying his achievement. And till he had strutted himself right out the city gates into the broad, wide world. And it happened that as he went in out of the city gates into the wide, wide world, there happened to be a little bird that had managed to get himself stuck in some thickets next to the door or the gates. Well, the little tailor helped the little creature out, and he put it in his pocket as well. And then off he went, light-hearted and light-footed, with glee in his heart. He felt so much energy and great resolve that he had marched himself right up an exceedingly high mountain. And when he got to the top, he was surprised how quickly he had gone, and how that he was not short of breath. There at the very summit of the mountain, on a precipice overlooking the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, was a magnificent giant. The little tailor walked up to him and he said, "Hello there, comrade. I'm looking to go out into the world too, and prove myself. How about the two of us go along together? We can be mates." The giant looked at him and he said, "You, mate? You're nothing but a pipsqueak midget. You couldn't do anything for me." "Oh, yeah," said the little tailor. "You think so, huh?" And he pulled back his jacket, pushed out his chest, and he said, "Look at this." The giant read his belt, 7 in 1 blow. The giant, thinking that that was 7 warriors that the tailor had defeated, couldn't help but have a little respect for the little fellow. "All right," he said. He picked up a stone off the ground. "Let me give you a little trial." And the giant squoze that rock with all his might, with all his strength, until his face went red as a beet. And soon that rock started to drip great beads of water from it. "If you're so strong," said the giant, "do what I did." The little tailor said, "Why, is that all? I can do a lot better than that." "Well, that's That's simple for someone that's defeated 7 in a blow. And he took his only piece of food that he had out of his pocket, that old moldy cheese in his hand, and quite effortlessly he squoze it as hard as he could until it gushed out in between his fingers as milk. "Ah, looky there," said the tailor. "I didn't even have to turn red in the face." The giant was in disbelief. "All right," said the giant. He took his rock and he hurled it into the sky. The rock went so high into the sky that it nearly disappeared before it come back down. The little tailor, or the giant, then said, "All right, little dwarf, do that." And the tailor said, "That was a pretty good throw indeed, but it did come down right over there, I saw. I will throw one so high that it shall go up to heaven and never return." And he took out the bird that he had fortunately captured on his way out the gate. And he tossed it into the air, and the bird, full of passion and life for his regained freedom, flew off up into the heavens, never to return to earth again. The giant then said, "Well, I suppose your throwing's adequate. How's your lifting doing? You see this large oak tree that's fallen? Why don't you help me carry it off this mountain?" "I'd be glad to," said the tailor. "You take the trunk end over there, and I'll take the heavier end with all these cumbersome branches on it." So the giant went over to the trunk and took the massive tree up into his arms, and he laid it upon his back. It was a great burden. It felt like the weight of the world upon him. And the little tailor, when he could see the giant could not turn around and look at him, he sat upon one of the branches in the back, and he said, "All right, I'm ready." The giant began to tug and struggle, pulling that great large tree down off the mountain. It was causing him great pain and suffering and anguish. He was sweating and all the time he was engaged in all this work. In the back, there was the little tailor. He was whistling and singing songs if this whole thing was child's play. Giant, finally exhausted, said, "All right, I'm tired. I'm going to drop this log." The little tailor jumped off the limb quickly and acted like he was holding up the tree with his arms, when the log came down with a boom. It came so heavy to the earth, the whole earth shook. And the little tailor said, "Why, I thought a giant like you would surely be able to carry a log at least." The giant was growing a bit irritated with this little tailor's insults. "Well, if you think you're so strong, come to my great castle and live there with me." The little tailor said, "I'd be happy to. I didn't ever think you would ask. Thank you for your hospitality." And away they went. Along the way, prior to them arriving to his castle with all his buddy giants, he came to a very large cherry tree, and the cherry tree had some luscious, delicious cherries on the very top limbs. The giant paused. He reached up there to the top limb, and he pulled it down so the little tailor could reach it. "Hang on to this limb," he said. "That's where all the delicious berries are." So the little tailor did so. He hung on to the limb, but instantly the giant let go. And now the tailor, feeling so light and giddy, just that limb catapulted him up and over the tree, all the way to the other side, almost as if he was some kind of ball. Fortunately, the little tailor did not hit any rocks or logs, but landed safely on a soft piece of grass. "Why, you weren't even strong enough to hold a flimsy limb," said the giant. The little tailor said, "What do you mean? You think that was difficult to hold for someone that had killed 7 in one blow? It had nothing to do with strength. I was jumping over the tree. I'd like to see you try it if you can." The giant, now being challenged, stepped back from the tree and to get a little head start in his leap. And then he ran as fast as he could and tried to leap up over the tree. Unfortunately, he was too awkward and heavy and went crashing miserably into it. "Oh, that's quite all right," said the little tailor. "We can practice that on another time. It looks like you do need a little practice on your jump." And the giant wanted to just thump this little man. But he thought he would wait for the right moment when he was least expecting it. So they went on, and when they arrived at the giant's castle, it was massive and grand, all made of stone, and inside the courthouse was a big bonfire. Several giants were around it. They all had spigots with roasting, each one of them an innocent lamb that they were going to eat for dinner. After dinner, the giant showed the little tailor to his room. And in the room, there was a massive, gigantic bed. The giant said, "You can stay here for the night. You can sleep in the bed there." And after the giant left him to his privacy, the tailor could not jump up on that bed. It was so high. He had to crawl up the bedpost to get up. And then when he laid down in the middle of this bed, it was so wide he felt like he was in the vast, vast ocean. It felt very uncomfortable. So he hopped down off the bed and he curled up in the corner of the room where he could feel a little more comfortable to sleep. He was suddenly awoken in the middle of the night at 12 midnight. When he opened his eyes, there in the darkness was the giant with a large iron rod, and he, with that rod, was smashing the bed to smithereens. "Well," the giant roared, "that should be the end of that little grasshopper." And he then left. The next morning, when everyone arose, the giants resumed their daily routine as they usually would out in the courtyard and had forgotten all about that little tailor. But the little tailor came out boldly into the courtyard. He had his jacket back and his shoulders up, his chin up, very confidently showing off his belt. 7 in one blow. Well, they looked at him, stunned. Is this dwarf invisible? Is he some ghost that's risen from the dead? The giants were overcome with fear, and they fled the castle. Now the little tailor, having defeated these bodily brute savages, he went on his way for more nobler achievements that he could encounter. He followed his nose for that sweet fragrance of goodness and beauty. Finally, after a very long journey, he came to a royal palace, something that you might see in a mystical kingdom. It was beautiful and glorious. But he was very tired, so he laid down on the manicured grass in the courtyard, and he just drifted off to sleep. And while he was sleeping there, passerbys noticed his belt being exposed. 7 in one blow, they read with awe. This stranger must be some great warrior. It was reported to the king, and the king was advised that he should try to recruit this warrior into the army. Whatever reward that he should require. The king thought this to be good advice, and so he wrote up an offer and sent it to the messenger with him. And the messenger went and waited next to that foreigner sleeping on the grass, and waited until he woke up. Finally, the stranger woke up, and he stretched out his arms and legs, and then opened his eyes. Lord, said the messenger, the king has made you an offer to be recruited into his army and serve him. And he handed him the piece of paper. He's offered you a very lucrative wage and a very special place for you to live. The little tailor immediately said, Why, that's precisely why I have come here. Yes, I am now ready to serve my king. So he was taken and dressed in the full army regalia, breastplate and shield, helmet and boots, sword, the whole bit, given a horse to ride and a very nice place to live. They even had a big parade and to honor such a great recruit into the army. He was at the height of his glory, it seemed, this tailor boy. But the other soldiers in the army, however, were not satisfied with this soldier. After all, they had been in the service of the king for many, many years and loyal. Yet they had not ever been given such favorable treatment, never been given a parade. And yet they felt like they could not challenge this stranger, for couldn't he take seven of them out at a time? So it seemed that they had no choice but to resign. They went to the king full of resentment and fear, told the king that they were going to resign from their posts. They no longer could serve under these conditions. The king, after more and more soldiers were resigning, his army was dwindling, began to regret that he had recruited this stranger. And yet, he couldn't just dismiss him, take back what he had given him. After all, this great warrior might rally the people and plan a coup and take over the kingdom. So the king was in a little bit of a quagmire, didn't know exactly what to do. He thought about it and thought about it until he came up with a very devious plan to get rid of this stranger. He went to the little tailor and he said, "There are two great giants. They're monsters that live in the forest. They burn our homes and they pillage and plunder our communities, even murdering our citizens. Yet there is not a single warrior in my army that's brave enough to go up against them. You, my great warrior, will you take 100 of my men, go into the forest and defeat these monsters? If you do, you will be greatly rewarded. I shall give you half of my kingdom and even my daughter's hand in marriage." The little tailor fell to one knee. "Oh, great king," he said, "I am greatly honored that you should entrust me to such an assignment. After all, it's not every day one is offered a beautiful princess and half a kingdom. Yes, I shall go and defeat these monsters, and I will do it without the 100 men that you're offering. I will do it alone, for after all, 2 is much less than 7, and I have defeated 7 in one blow already." So the king smiled deviously, shook hands with the tailor, and they parted ways. The next day, the little tailor took 100 of the king's men out to the edge of the forest. And there, he dismounted his horse, and he told the others to stay here. "I will go into the forest myself to take care of this matter," he said. The others were all too happy to do so. And that foreigner, who was the little tailor, then leaped into the dark forest. And he started walking up through the quiet trees, looking this way, looking that way, listening for any sounds that he could hear. Finally, he heard something up above, or up in front of him. It was the sound of someone snoring. And sure enough, there in a grove of trees were 2 massive giants. Well, a surge of ideas came into his mind. Quickly filled up his pockets with little stones, climbed up the tree, and out onto the leafy branches that hung just over the giants. And then he took one of the rocks out of his pocket, he aimed it for the giant's chest, and dropped it. Plunk! It fell right on the giant. But he didn't feel it. He took another rock out and plunk. But the giant didn't feel it, and so he plunked another one down, and finally the giant woke up and he turned over and he just shoved his companion. "What are you hitting me for? I'm trying to get some sleep here." The other giant said, "I'm not hitting you. You're probably just dreaming." So he turned over and tried to close his eyes again to resume sleeping. Little Tailor then pulled out another stone, and he dropped it on the second giant. Plunk. "Are you kidding me?" that giant said. He pushed his first giant, and he said, "I told you I didn't hit you. Why are you hitting me?" The other giant turned over. "I didn't hit you. You're the one hitting me." "I did not." They started going back and forth, arguing and hitting one another. Finally, they were so exhausted that they just kind of separated a little, got some distance between them, and went back to sleep again. The little tailor then took the largest stone that he had, and he heaved it down as hard as he could on the first giant. "All right," he said, "that's enough." He stood up in a rage and, like a madman, picked up the giant, his companion, and threw him into the forest. The other giant stood up and he uprooted a tree and he threw it back at him. He caught that tree and threw it down on the ground, and then he picked up another tree, uprooted it, and there was a storm, whirlwind, fighting back and forth between the two giants. It seemed as if the little tailor was sitting in the eye of the storm, and he hoped that the giants wouldn't uproot the tree he was in. Well, after some time of ferocious fighting with one another, they gave each other such a big blow that the two giants fell down to the earth and looked as if they were dead. Little Tailor jumped down out of the tree, drew his sword, and stabbed each of them through the heart. Now, everything was peaceful, and he could take a sigh of relief. When he did so, he looked at the tree he was in. All the other trees around it had been uprooted. Only his were left standing. And he thought, how fortunate I am to be alive. He walked out of the forest and he told the others. "The work's done," he said. "The two giants are killed. There was a bit of a fight. The giants pulled up trees to help defend themselves, but what's that for someone that has killed 7 in one blow?" And the other soldier said, "But you're not even injured, sir." "Oh, no, I'm quite all right. They didn't even mess up my hair." "Well," they said, "we want to see with our own eyes." "Well, you can go in and see for yourself," he says. "They're dead." So the soldiers rode into the forest, even if it was a little uneasy for them. And sure enough, they came to those brutes, giants, just bathing in their own blood. And they could see the evidence of a fight with all the uprooted trees around. Well, when this was reported back to the king, rather than being happy, was quite distraught. After all, that wasn't his plan. He had hoped the giants would have killed the little tailor. Now he was regretting having offered his daughter's hand in marriage. What should he do, he thought. He come up with a second plan. He told the little tailor there was another creature in the forest causing a lot of fear and anguish. It was a unicorn. A unicorn, he said, that was as lawless and fierce as a rhinoceros, and as quick as a cheetah. There is nobody that has been able to capture this unicorn. He said, if you and 100 of my horsemen are able to capture him and tame the unicorn, then I shall give you my daughter's hand in marriage. Now, the little tailor, rather being resentful for not getting his due shake and not being acknowledged for his sacrifice, instead gleefully said, I would be happy to, great king, for a unicorn is nothing, or at least half as fearful as the two giants. So the next day, the little tailor, when he woke up, got his armor on, and he went out the door. And then he thought, oh, I should probably take an axe with me and a rope. So he put a rope around his shoulder, and he put his axe on his belt, and away he went. The 100 horsemen and him went to the edge of the forest, where he again told them to stay back, and he'll take this matter into his own hands. He got off his horse, and he went into the dark forest. And not too long, he had came to a clearing where he came face to face with this strange-looking unicorn. The unicorn was indeed fierce-looking, nothing like the little innocent, pure unicorns you see in fairy tales. This was a beast, and he had eyes that glowed like wolves, and his nostrils were flaring and snorting. His paw in the earth was his hooves. The little tailor took his rope out, and he said, now, easy now, gentle, not so fast, not so fast, as he started to creep up to it. But the unicorn just dashed forward. And as the unicorn lowered its head to ram him through the heart, the little tailor stepped to the side. Boing! The unicorn's horn had rammed into a tree instead. It lodged itself so securely that no matter how much wriggling about that the unicorn did, could not loosen it. It wriggled and it struggled, trying to get free from that tree. It did so with all its might and strength, but in the end, the unicorn was broken and fell weak. Well, it looks like the little bird is caught, said the little tailor. He took his rope and he wrapped it around the unicorn's neck. And then fortunately he brought that axe with him so he could chisel the horn out from the tree and release it. Then he led the unicorn, now broken and weak, out of the forest and down the streets of the city, where the people cheered at the evil unicorn had been captured. The king, though, was not cheering. He was now worried. What is going to become of my daughter? She's going to be marrying this stranger. I cannot have this. I must do something. So when he saw the little tailor again, he said, I really want to offer my daughter's hand in marriage, but unfortunately the church house where the ceremony will be held is being haunted by a wild boar in the forest nearby, and nobody will even go to the church if that boar is not captured. my hands are tied. I cannot hold this wedding ceremony unless you go capture that boar. The little tailor said, no problem, that sounds like child play to me. He shook hands with him and left. The next day, he went out with 100 huntsmen this time. And at the edge of the forest, he said, stay back, I'll take this matter into my own hands, which the huntsmen were more than happy to. They had met this boar once before, and they had no interest in meeting him again. So soon, as the tailor went into the forest, he met up with this giant boar. It was grinding its teeth and frothing at the mouth. And the tailor started to run. And the boar started to run after him. He weaved through the trees, hopped over fallen logs, scrambled through the brush, over rocks. Finally, when he could see the boar was not going to relent, but kept right on his back, he ran right into the front doors of that chapel. But the boar followed him. The boar went right into the chapel as well, frothing, grinding its teeth. Well, fortunately, the back window was open, and the little tailor jumped out the back window. And fortunately, the boar was too large and heavy to be able to leap through the back window itself. Meanwhile, the little tailor ran around to the front of the chapel again and shut the door. The boar had been captured. Simple as that. He went back to the huntsman. Didn't hardly take him long at all. The boar is captured, he said. They could not believe him. We want to see it with our own eyes, they said. Very well. You can see for yourself. And he took him to the church. There was the wild boar laying down in the chapel. Well, now the king had to finally succumb and honor his oath that he would indeed give the tailor half his kingdom and his own daughter hand in marriage. After all, he had 300 witnesses against him. So he organized the wedding. It was held without much cheer on his daughter's behalf or his behalf. But nevertheless, the tailor had achieved his success. But that's not the end of the story, because several months later, the princess could hear the prince in his sleep. He was talking. Oh, he was saying, all right, stay still. I want to measure your legs and your waist. See how I can make these pants for you. What color do you like? He says in his sleep. I think you would look good in blue. Oh, you would look good in gold and purple. And so forth. And of course, all this talk had nothing to do with what warriors would talk about. She began to become suspicious that this great warrior was not who he said he was. And with a little bit of research, she found out that indeed, from his genealogy, he was not a great warrior, but in fact was from the working class, a mere tailor. She went to her father and she said, "My husband is an impostor. He's falsified his identity. He should be thrown in jail. And her father, who was the king, said, "No worries, my daughter. We finally have a just cause to get rid of this man. Tomorrow or tonight, leave your door open. I will send some officers to shackle him, put him on a ship, and have him sailed off to a land where he will never return." Well, when he went to recruit those officers, one of them, of his knights, would not go along with this, for he had developed a friendship and a trust in the prince. And he went privately to the prince and he told him that the king was planning to capture him tonight. And the little tailor said, "Well, we shall see about that." So that night, when the princess and the prince went to sleep as they normally would, the tailor pretended to sleep. And at midnight, when the princess got up out of her bed, she cracked open the door to allow the officers to come in. The tailor began to pretend to talk in his sleep. And he said, "All right, giants, stay still. I need to measure your waist, your arms, and your legs. Now hold on, stand still, before I box your ears with this yardstick. After all, I've killed 2 giants. I've killed 7 in one blow, captured a unicorn, captured a wild boar. And do you think I'm afraid of these officers outside my door?" The officers had been witnesses to to all the events that had already transpired. Fear come over them, and they turned around. And they fled as fast as they could, as if an army was chasing after them. And from that day forward, no one ever questioned the prince's identity again. No one challenged him in a fight, but he was honored. And when the day came when his father-in-law, the king, passed away, he was sworn in as the new king. And that is how a little tailor from the working class became a great and magnificent king. The Brave Little Tailor by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm.